The stars were quiet that night when Commander Jake Morrison received the message that would change everything. He sat in the captain's chair of the Earth Defense Force ship Warrior, drinking his third cup of coffee and watching the endless black of space through the main screen. His crew was running their usual patrol along the outer edges of human territory, checking for pirates or alien ships that might cause trouble. Morrison was tired. He had been doing these patrols for 5 years now, and nothing interesting ever happened out here. The most exciting thing they usually found was broken satellites or lost cargo ships. He was thinking about asking for a transfer to something more exciting, when the communication system started beeping loudly. "Sir, we're getting a transmission," said Captain Lisa Brooks, his second in command. She was a tough woman with short, black hair who had served with Morrison for 3 years. "It's coming from deep space way outside our normal range." Morrison sat up straight. "Put it through." The main screen flickered and showed static for a few seconds. Then a voice came through, broken and full of fear. It was speaking in the common galactic language that most alien species use to talk to each other. "This is High Chancellor Vextai of the Zalathi Council. Anyone who can hear this message, we are desperate. Our worlds are under attack. They call themselves the Void Hunters. They are destroying everything." The voice cut out for a moment, then came back weaker than before. "We have tried to fight them, but our weapons do nothing. They killed millions on our outer colonies. They take prisoners and make them slaves. Please, if anyone receives this message, we need help. We will give anything. Coordinates are attached to this transmission." The message ended with a burst of static, leaving Morrison and his crew staring at the blank screen in silence. "Did you get all that?" Morrison asked Brooks. "Yes, sir. The computer is translating it now. It looks like the Zalathi are in serious trouble." Brooks checked her console. "Sir, according to our files, the Zalathi have never talked to humans before. They think we're too primitive to be worth their time." Morrison knew this was true. The Zalathi were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. They lived on crystal worlds, and their technology was far ahead of anything humans had. They were also members of something called the Galactic Council, which was like a government for most of the alien species in the galaxy. Humans had tried to join this council many times, but they always said humans were too violent and backwards. "What do we know about these Void Hunters?" Morrison asked. Brooks typed quickly on her keyboard, pulling up information from the ship's database. "Not much, sir. There are some reports from trading ships about a species that attacks colonies on the edge of space. They seem to move from system to system, taking everything they can and leaving nothing behind." Morrison studied the data on his screen. The reports painted a dark picture. The Void Hunters traveled in huge fleets of ugly, boxy ships that looked more like flying factories than normal spaceships. They would arrive at a planet, land massive machines that stripped away all the valuable materials, and take the people as slaves. When they were done, they left the world as a dead rock floating in space. "How many worlds have they hit?" Morrison asked. "At least 12 that we know of," Brooks replied. "But these are just the ones that managed to send out distress calls before they were destroyed. There could be many more." Morrison felt a cold anger building in his chest. He had seen what happened when bad people were allowed to hurt innocent others. His own parents had been killed by pirates when he was young, and he had joined the Earth Defense Force to make sure the same thing didn't happen to other families. "Sir," said Lieutenant Ryan Phillips from the communication station, "should I contact Earth Command and tell them about this message?" Morrison thought for a moment. The smart thing to do would be to report this to his superiors and let them decide what to do. But he also knew that by the time all the paperwork was done, and the politicians finished arguing, the Zalathi might all be dead. "Yes, contact Admiral Kate Sullivan at Earth Command. Tell her we have a situation that needs immediate attention." Morrison stood up and walked to the navigation console. "But while we're waiting for orders, plot a course for the Zalathi home system. I want to see what we're dealing with." "Sir, are you sure that's a good idea?" Brooks asked. "If these Void Hunters are as dangerous as the reports say, one ship won't be able to do much against them." Morrison looked at his crew. They were good people, all volunteers who had joined the Earth Defense Force to protect humanity and its allies. Even though the aliens didn't consider humans to be allies, Morrison felt a duty to help anyone who was being attacked by monsters. Maybe one ship can't stop an entire fleet, Morrison said. But we can gather information and send it back to Earth. And maybe we can save a few lives while we're at it. The ship's engines hummed to life as they changed course towards Zalathi. Space. Morrison knew he was probably making a mistake, but he couldn't ignore a cry for help, even if it came from people who had always looked down on humans. 3 hours later, the communication system beeped again. This time it was a message from Admiral Kate Sullivan at Earth Command. Morrison, I got your report about the Zalathi situation. I'm sending you new orders. Do not engage the enemy directly. Your job is to observe and report back. I'm putting together a battle fleet, but it will take time to get everyone ready. Morrison smiled. Admiral Sullivan was one of the few high-ranking officers who understood that sometimes you had to take action, even when the politicians wanted to talk things over first. Brooks, how long until we reach Zalathi space? Morrison asked. About 6 hours at our current speed, sir. Morrison nodded. Good. That gives us time to study everything we can about the Void Hunters and figure out what we're up against. As the warrior flew through space toward the crisis, Morrison had no idea that he was about to start something that would change the relationship between humans and the rest of the galaxy forever. The aliens had always seen humans as violent, primitives who didn't belong in civilized space. But when faced with an enemy that only understood violence, they were about to learn why being violent primitives might not be such a bad thing after all. The message had been sent, and Earth was responding. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you asked the most dangerous species in known space for help. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Retribution, watching dozens of human warships move through space in perfect formation. She had been commanding fleets for 15 years, but she had never seen the Earth Defense Force move so quickly to respond to a crisis. Within 12 hours of receiving Morrison's report, every available ship in 3 sectors was heading towards Zalathi space. Sullivan was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had grown up on Mars, where life was hard, and people learned to be tough or they didn't survive. Her parents had been miners who died in a cave-in when she was 16, and she had joined the military to make something of herself. Now she commanded the largest human battle fleet ever assembled. Admiral, called Commander Ben Carter from the tactical station. We're getting updated reports from Commander Morrison. The situation is worse than we thought. Sullivan walked over to look at the data streaming across Carter's screen. The images made her stomach turn. 3 entire Zalathi colonies had been destroyed in the past week. The before and after pictures showed beautiful crystal cities reduced to smoking ruins, and green forests turned into gray wastelands. How many people lived on those worlds? Sullivan asked. According to Zalathi records, about 200 million, total, Carter replied. Morrison's ship detected massive energy signatures consistent with orbital bombardment. They're not just taking resources, Admiral. They're wiping out entire populations. Sullivan felt the familiar cold anger that had driven her through her entire military career. She had seen pirates attack merchant ships and raiders hit small colonies. But this was something different. This was the complete destruction of entire civilizations. Status report on the fleet, she ordered. 43 warships ready for combat, including 8 heavy cruisers and 2 battleships, Carter said. All ships are loaded with full ammunition, and their crews are at battle stations. Sullivan nodded. It was a powerful force, but she knew they were going up against an enemy that had already destroyed some of the most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy. The Zalathi were known for having strong shields and energy weapons that could cut through most armor. If their defenses had failed so completely, the Void Hunters had to be incredibly dangerous. Admiral, said Lieutenant Commander Ryan Phillips from Communications, we're receiving a transmission from the Zalathi fleet. They want to talk to you, directly. Put them through. The main screen flickered and showed the bridge of an alien ship that looked like it was made entirely of crystal. Standing in the center was a tall, thin creature that glowed with soft blue light. This was High Chancellor Vextai, the leader of the Zalathi Council. Admiral Sullivan, Vextai said in perfect English. His voice was musical, like wind chimes, in a gentle breeze. We are grateful that humanity has responded to our call for help. However, there are certain protocols that must be followed. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Protocols? Yes. The Galactic Council has very strict rules about how warfare must be conducted. All civilized species follow these rules to prevent unnecessary suffering. Vextay's glow dimmed slightly. You must understand we cannot simply destroy enemy ships. We must attempt to disable them and capture their crews for rehabilitation. Sullivan stared at the alien leader in disbelief. Rehabilitation? These creatures have murdered millions of your people. Nevertheless, the rules are clear. Kinetic weapons are forbidden against sentient beings. Energy weapons must be set to stun rather than kill. Any prisoners taken must be treated according to galactic law. Vexitai's tone became more firm. These are not suggestions, Admiral. They are requirements for any species that wishes to be considered civilized. Sullivan looked around her bridge. Her officers were staring at the screen with expressions of shock and anger. Captain Lisa Brooks, who had been promoted to serve as Sullivan's tactical advisor, shook her head in disgust. Admiral, Brooks said quietly, I've been reading the intelligence reports. The Void Hunters don't take prisoners. They kill or enslave everyone they capture. They've been doing this for years, maybe decades. Sullivan turned back to the screen where Vextai was waiting for her response. She had dealt with politicians and bureaucrats her entire career. But this was something new. Here was an alien leader, whose people were being wiped out, and he was more concerned about following rules than saving lives. High Chancellor, Sullivan said slowly, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your enemy is committing genocide against your people, but you want us to fight them with kid gloves because it might hurt our reputation with the Galactic Council? The rules exist for good reasons, Admiral. Once we abandon civilized behavior, we become no better than the monsters we fight. Sullivan felt her anger rising, but she kept her voice calm and professional. And how well have these civilized rules worked for you so far? Vextai's glow flickered, and for a moment he looked uncertain. We have suffered some setbacks, but... Some setbacks? Sullivan interrupted. You've lost 3 entire worlds, and 200 million people in 1 week. Your most advanced defensive systems couldn't even slow them down. And you want us to fight with the same failed tactics that got you into this mess? The alien leader straightened up, his glow becoming brighter. Admiral, if you cannot follow our rules of engagement, then perhaps we should reconsider accepting your assistance. Sullivan smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. You're absolutely right, High Chancellor. You should reconsider. Because the only reason your species still exists is that you called us for help. And we're going to help you, but we're going to do it our way. She gestured to Phillips, who cut the transmission. The crystal bridge disappeared, leaving Sullivan staring at the tactical display showing the Void Hunter fleet advancing toward the Zalathi homeworld. All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan, she announced over the fleet communication system. I want every captain to understand our situation clearly. The enemy we're facing has committed genocide against civilian populations. They have shown no mercy to anyone, including children and elderly. They enslave survivors and strip entire worlds bare. She paused, looking around at her bridge crew. These were men and women who had sworn to protect humanity and its allies, even if those allies didn't always appreciate the protection. The Galactic Council wants us to fight with one hand tied behind our backs. They want us to capture and rehabilitate mass murderers. They want us to follow their rules while our enemy follows no rules at all. Sullivan's voice grew harder. I have a different idea. She activated the tactical display, showing the positions of both fleets. The Void Hunter ships were massive and ugly, built for destruction rather than speed or elegance. The human ships were smaller but faster, designed by people who understood that in a real fight, victory went to whoever was willing to do whatever it took to win. As of right now, we are operating under Protocol 7. Rules of engagement are simple. Eliminate all Void Hunter vessels with extreme prejudice. No attempts at capture, no stunning weapons, no mercy. Sullivan's voice carried to every human ship in the fleet. They chose to be monsters, now they get to find out what real monsters look like. The bridge was silent for a moment as everyone absorbed what she had just said. Then Carter spoke up from his station. "Admiral, the Zalathi are going to file complaints. With the Galactic Council, this could cause diplomatic problems for Earth." Sullivan turned to look at him. "Commander, in about 6 hours we're going to engage an enemy that has destroyed entire civilizations. Do you really think I care what some politicians think about our methods?" Carter smiled grimly. "No, ma'am, I don't think you do." "Good, because we're about to show the galaxy why Earth is classified as a death world, and why picking a fight with humans is the last mistake these void hunters will ever make." The battle began at the edge of the crystalline prime system, where the void hunter fleet had set up a blockade around the Zalathi homeworld. Colonel Amy Rodriguez sat in the cockpit of her Valkyrie fighter, watching the enemy ships through her targeting display. She had been flying combat missions for 8 years, but she had never seen anything like the void hunter vessels. They were huge, ugly things that looked more like floating scrapyards than real spaceships. Each one was covered in spikes and weapon ports with thick armor plating that had been welded together without any concern for appearance. Rodriguez counted at least 50 of the massive ships, plus hundreds of smaller attack craft swarming around them like angry insects. "Phoenix Squadron, this is Rodriguez," she said into her communication system. "Remember what Admiral Sullivan told us. These things have been murdering innocent people for fun. Today we show them what happens when they pick a fight with the wrong species." Rodriguez's squadron consisted of 12 of humanity's best fighter pilots. They had trained together for 3 years and knew each other's flying styles better than their own families. Behind them, the main human battle fleet was moving into position, their ships looking small and fragile compared to the massive void hunter vessels. "All fighters execute attack pattern Delta 7, Rodriguez ordered. "Hit their weapon systems first, then go for their engines. Don't give them time to react." The human fighters accelerated to attack speed, their engines glowing bright blue, as they dove toward the enemy fleet. The void hunters had expected them to attack in the traditional way used by most galactic species, with careful formations and warning shots. Instead, the humans came in fast and low, using the debris field from destroyed Zalathi ships as cover. Rodriguez locked her weapons onto the nearest void hunter ship and fired. Her fighter carried missiles designed to punch through heavy armor, and they slammed into the enemy vessel's weapon ports with devastating effect. Explosions rippled along the alien ship's hull as its gun turrets were blown apart. Around her, the other human pilots were doing the same thing. They didn't waste time with fancy flying or showing off. They simply found their targets and destroyed them with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the lead void hunter ships had lost most of their defensive weapons. "This is too easy," said Lieutenant Mark Davis over the radio. "These guys fight like they've never faced a real military before." Rodriguez checked her tactical display and realized Davis was right. The void hunters were powerful, but they weren't smart fighters. They relied on having bigger ships and more weapons than their enemies. They had never fought an opponent that used speed and tactics instead of brute force. "Don't get overconfident," Rodriguez warned. "There are still a lot of them and they're learning fast." As if to prove her point, the void hunter ships began changing their formation. Instead of staying spread out, they pulled together into a tight defensive cluster. Their smaller attack craft formed a protective screen around the larger vessels, making it harder for the human fighters to get close. But the humans adapted quickly. Rodriguez led her squadron in a new attack pattern, using hit-and-run tactics that the void hunters couldn't counter. They would dart in, fire their weapons, and disappear back into the debris field before the enemy could respond. Meanwhile, the main human battle fleet was engaging the void hunter capital ships. Captain Steve Mitchell commanded the heavy cruiser, UES Vengeance, one of the most powerful ships in the human fleet. He stood on his bridge watching the massive enemy vessels through the main screen. "Target their command ship," Mitchell ordered his weapons officer. "Full power to all railguns." The Vengeance carried weapons that most galactic species considered primitive and barbaric. Instead of elegant energy beams, the human ship fired solid metal slugs at incredible speed. The railguns could accelerate a piece of metal to nearly the speed of light, giving it enough force to punch through almost any armor. "Firing," announced the weapons officer. The railguns discharged with a sound like thunder, sending 6 metal slugs racing toward the Void Hunter flagship. The alien ship was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Vengeance, with armor, plating 3 meters thick. Its builders had designed it to withstand the energy weapons used by most galactic civilizations, but they had never faced kinetic weapons fired at relativistic speeds. The metal slugs hit the Void Hunter ship and passed completely through it, creating holes the size of subway tunnels. The alien vessel shuddered as massive explosions erupted along its hull. Secondary detonations followed as the ship's own weapons and fuel supplies caught fire. "Direct hit," reported the tactical officer. "Enemy flagship is breaking apart." Mitchell watched through the main screen as the huge Void Hunter ship split in half, its crew exposed to the vacuum of space. He felt no satisfaction at the destruction, only grim determination to finish the job. "Target the next largest ship," he ordered. "Keep firing until they're all gone." Across the battlefield, other human ships were achieving similar results. The Void Hunters had superior numbers and heavier armor, but they had no answer for human weapons and tactics. Every species in the galaxy had spent centuries developing more sophisticated energy weapons and defensive shields. Only humans had continued to perfect the ancient art of throwing rocks very, very fast. Commander Nick Torres led a squadron of human bombers toward a group of Void Hunter ships that were trying to retreat. His orders were clear. No enemy vessels were to escape. The aliens had civilian prisoners aboard their ships, people they had captured from destroyed colonies. Torres knew that if any Void Hunters got away, those prisoners would either be sold as slaves or killed. "Bomber Squadron Alpha, this is Torres," he announced to his pilots. "Target their engines first, then their life support systems. We're not letting these murderers escape." The human bombers were heavily armed and well protected, designed to attack the most dangerous targets on any battlefield. They flew in close formation, their weapons locked onto the fleeing Void Hunter ships. "Remember," Torres continued, "these ships have been destroying entire worlds. The people aboard them chose to be monsters. Today, they learn what real monsters look like." The bombers opened fire with everything they had. Missiles and railgun rounds slammed into the Void Hunter vessels, tearing through their hulls and destroying their engines. The alien ships lost power and began drifting helplessly through space. "Should we board them and take prisoners?" asked one of Torres's pilots. Torres looked at his tactical display, which showed the locations of 17 destroyed worlds where the Void Hunters had committed genocide. He thought about the millions of innocent people who had died, and the thousands more who were probably suffering in the cargo holds of these same ships. "Negative," Torres replied. "Target their life support systems. No survivors." The bombers fired again, and the last of the retreating Void Hunter ships went dark and silent. Back on the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Sullivan watched the tactical display as the last enemy contacts disappeared from her screen. The battle had lasted less than 4 hours, and not a single Void Hunter ship had escaped. "Admiral," reported Commander Carter, "all enemy vessels have been destroyed. We're detecting no signs of life from any of the wrecks." Sullivan nodded grimly. "Casualty report?" 3 fighters damaged, no personnel lost. The Vengeance took some hits but nothing serious. Sullivan stared at the screen showing the debris field that had once been the Void Hunter fleet. Somewhere in that wreckage were the bodies of thousands of aliens who had chosen to make their living by destroying entire civilizations. She felt no regret about their deaths, only satisfaction that they would never hurt anyone again. The Zalathi Council had wanted them to capture and rehabilitate these creatures. Sullivan wondered how they would have explained that to the ghosts of 200 million murdered innocents. The conference room aboard the UES Retribution was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat at the head of a long table, facing a group of alien representatives who looked deeply uncomfortable. The Galactic Council had arrived 3 hours after the battle ended, and they had been arguing with Sullivan ever since. High Chancellor Vexitai of the Zalathi sat across from her, his crystal body dim and flickering with what Sullivan had learned was a sign of stress. Next to him sat Speaker Zixtai from the Hive Mind, a creature that looked like a giant insect with 4 arms and compound eyes. The third council member was Ambassador Leafsinger from the Botanical Union, a plant-like being whose flowers were closed tight in what appeared to be fear. Admiral Sullivan, Vextai began, his musical voice strained. We must discuss what happened during the battle. Your methods were extreme. Sullivan leaned back in her chair and studied the aliens. She had been expecting this conversation since the moment she gave the order to destroy the Void Hunter fleet completely. The Galactic Council had rules about everything, and humans had just broken most of them. My methods were effective, Sullivan replied calmly. The Void Hunter threat has been eliminated. Your people are safe. I would think you'd be grateful. We are grateful, Vextai said quickly. But you must understand that what you did violates 17 different galactic conventions on warfare. The complete destruction of the enemy fleet, the refusal to take prisoners, the use of kinetic weapons against sentient beings. Those sentient beings were committing genocide, interrupted Captain Helen Barnes, Sullivan's intelligence officer. She was a thin woman with short red hair, who had spent the last week studying reports of Void Hunter attacks. They destroyed entire civilizations. They enslaved children. They turned living worlds into dead rocks. Speaker Zixtai's compound eyes focused on Barnes. When the hive mind spoke, it was with the voice of billions of connected minds. Violence breeds violence human. By responding to their brutality with greater brutality, you have lowered yourself to their level. Sullivan felt her temper rising, but she kept her voice steady. No, we haven't. We targeted military vessels engaged in acts of war. We didn't attack civilian populations. We didn't take slaves. We stopped monsters from creating more victims. But surely some of them could have been saved, said Leafsinger, her voice like wind through leaves. Perhaps they were forced into this life by circumstances beyond their control. With proper rehabilitation and guidance, they might have become productive members of society. Sullivan stared at the plant-like alien in disbelief. You want me to rehabilitate creatures that were melting down entire cities for scrap metal? That were selling kidnapped children in slave markets? The Galactic Council has successfully rehabilitated many species that were once considered dangerous, Vextai said. The Stellar Corsairs, the Void Wanderers, even the blood cult of Kepler-7, all of them are now peaceful, contributing members of galactic society. How many people died while you were rehabilitating them? Barnes asked. The three council members exchanged glances. Finally, Vextai spoke. The process of rehabilitation does require patience. Sometimes there are setbacks. Setbacks, Sullivan repeated. Is that what you call it when the blood cult murdered 3 million people on New Terra while you were trying to talk them into being nice? That was an unfortunate incident, but it led to important reforms in our rehabilitation programs, Speaker Zixtai said. The current system is much more effective. Sullivan stood up and walked to the large window that looked out into space. In the distance, she could see the wreckage of the Void Hunter fleet floating like a metal graveyard. Mixed in with the alien debris were the remains of Zalathi ships that had been destroyed in earlier battles. Let me tell you something about humans, Sullivan said without turning around. We come from a world that has been trying to kill us since the day we first stood upright. Everything on our planet is dangerous. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even the plants. We survived by learning to identify threats and eliminate them quickly. She turned back to face the council members. You come from garden worlds, where the biggest danger is a mild storm or a herbivore that might eat your crops. You had the luxury of developing philosophies about rehabilitation and second chances because you never faced an enemy that wanted to wipe you out completely. But surely you can see the value in our approach, Vextai said. The galaxy has been peaceful for centuries because we choose diplomacy over violence. Your galaxy has been peaceful because you've been lucky, Sullivan replied. You haven't faced a real threat until now. The Void Hunters were different from your usual pirates and raiders. They weren't interested in negotiation or rehabilitation. They were a cancer that needed to be cut out. Ambassador Leafsinger's flowers opened slightly. What guarantee do we have that you won't turn these same methods against us? If humans are willing to destroy entire fleets without mercy, what happens when we disagree on something important? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sullivan looked at each of the council members in turn, seeing the fear in their alien faces. They were realizing that they had invited apex predators into their peaceful galaxy, and now they weren't sure they could control them. "You want a guarantee?" Sullivan asked. "Here it is. Humans will protect our allies and our interests. We will not start fights, but we will finish them. And we will not let evil creatures hide behind your laws while they murder innocent people." She walked back to her chair and sat down. "You called us for help because your methods failed. We answered that call and solved your problem. But don't think for a second that we work for you. We are not your attack dogs to be unleashed when convenient and leashed when uncomfortable." "Then what do you want?" Speaker Zixtai asked. "Recognition," Sullivan said simply. "Treat us as equals, not as primitives you can use and discard. Except that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to be more dangerous than they are. And understand that the galaxy is not as safe as you thought it was." The three council members talked among themselves in their own languages for several minutes. Finally, Vextai spoke for the group. "We will need time to consider your proposals. The Galactic Council will have to vote on any changes to our current policies." Sullivan smiled, but it was not a warm expression. "You do that. Take all the time you need, but remember that while you're debating and forming committees, there are other threats out there in the dark. And when the next crisis comes, when the next group of monsters decides to prey on peaceful civilizations, you'll call us again." "What makes you so certain?" Leafsinger asked. "Because deep down you know the truth," Sullivan replied. "Your civilization exists because violent people like us are willing to do violent things to protect it. You may not like our methods, but you need them." 6 months later, Admiral Sullivan received another message from the Galactic Council. This time it came from the Botanical Union, whose worlds were being invaded by a species called the Swarm that consumed entire ecosystems. The message was brief and to the point. "We need your help. No restrictions, no rules, just stop them." Sullivan smiled as she read the message. The galaxy was finally learning the most important lesson humans had to teach. Sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be prepared for war. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to be more ruthless than the guilty. The human fleet departed Earth once again, carrying with them the weight of being the galaxy's protectors. They were the monsters that kept worse monsters. At bay, the killers who preserved life, the violent species that made peace possible for everyone else. And in the depths of space, other predators took notice. The galaxy had new apex predators, and they were unlike anything that had come before. They were humans, and they had just announced to the universe that Earth's children were not to be trifled with. The age of gentle diplomacy was ending. The age of human protection had begun.